Listen, this story right here, this is one of those cases that doesn't sit right, no matter how many times you hear it. Because on the surface, it looks like a tragic situation. But the deeper you go, the more questions start stacking up, and none of the answers seem to make sense. A young, beautiful influencer, Ashley Janney, travels across the world to celebrate her birthday, gets engaged in what looks like a dream vacation, and then just days later, she's gone. And the explanation? That she somehow did this to herself. But here's where everything takes a turn, because not everyone is buying that story. Not her family, not the internet, and not even celebrities. So when Cardi B stepped in and publicly said she doesn't believe it was self-inflicted, that's when this stopped being just another tragic headline and turned into a full-blown mystery that people are now trying to piece together in real time. Because once you start looking at the timeline, the details, and especially the behavior of the people involved, things start to feel off, like seriously off. And the more you look, the harder it becomes to ignore one simple question that keeps coming up over and over again. What actually happened in that hotel room? Because think about it, everything about this trip looked like something straight out of a luxury dream. Private villas, exotic locations, safari experiences, five-star resorts, the kind of lifestyle people only see on Instagram. And right in the middle of all that, her boyfriend, now fiancé, gets down on one knee and proposes. It's the kind of moment most people would call perfect. But just days later, according to reports, there's an argument. They're separated into different rooms, and then suddenly, she's found unresponsive. And here's the part that's really making people stop and think. The timeline doesn't just feel confusing. It feels delayed. Reports say her family wasn't contacted immediately. In fact, there was a gap long enough to make people question what was happening during those missing hours. And when details like that start surfacing, it changes how people see everything else. Because now, it's not just about what happened, it's about what might have been hidden. And this is exactly why the internet is going into full investigation mode. Old posts are being pulled up. Past relationships are being analyzed. The fiancé's background is being questioned. Even the smallest details, from body language in photos to inconsistencies in statements, are being picked apart. Because when a story doesn't add up, people start connecting dots. And once those dots start forming a pattern, that's when things get serious. Some are saying this could be a case of something going very wrong behind closed doors. Others believe there could be more people involved. And then there are those who think the truth is being buried under a version of events that's too convenient. But here's the thing. None of these theories would even exist if the original story felt solid. And right now, it doesn't. What makes this even more intense is the emotional side of it, because while the internet is debating theories, there's a real family behind this trying to figure out what happened to their daughter. A mother who got a phone call that didn't make sense, a timeline that feels incomplete, and a situation that, instead of bringing clarity, has only created more confusion. And that's why this story is hitting people so hard. Because it's not just about drama, it's about justice. It's about whether the truth is actually being told, or whether there's something bigger that hasn't been uncovered yet. And now, with voices like Cardi B stepping in and publicly questioning the narrative, the pressure is getting even higher. Because when someone with that kind of platform speaks up, it brings even more attention, more scrutiny, and more people asking the same question. If everything is exactly how it's being reported, then why does it feel like something is missing? Now let's slow this down, because the timeline is where things start getting uncomfortable. Not emotional, not dramatic, but uncomfortable in a way that makes you pause and think. According to the details coming out, Ashley Janney was in Zanzibar celebrating what should have been one of the happiest moments of her life. Her birthday, her engagement, her future. Everything looked perfect on the outside. Social media posts, luxury experiences, exotic animals, five-star locations. It all painted a picture of a woman living her dream life. But behind that picture, something shifted. And that shift didn't happen gradually. It happened fast. Just days after the engagement, There was reportedly an argument between her and her fiancé. Not just a small disagreement, but serious enough that hotel staff allegedly had to step in and separate them into different rooms. Now pause right there, because that detail alone already changes the tone of the entire story. This wasn't just a peaceful romantic trip anymore. Something happened that caused intervention. And yet, that part of the story feels like it's being brushed over. Then comes the next part. And this is where people really start questioning things. The next day, instead of hearing directly from her, her family gets a call, not from authorities, not from hospital staff, but from the fiancé. And what he tells them? That she did something to herself. But here's the detail that has people raising eyebrows. He tells them this happened hours earlier. Not immediately, not in real time, hours later. And when you think about that, it raises a very simple but powerful question. What happened during those hours? Because in situations like this, time matters. Every minute matters. And when there's a delay, people start wondering what was happening behind the scenes before that call was made. And it doesn't stop there. Because shortly after, the hotel and officials confirm that she had passed. But now the medical details start coming into play. Reports mention marks around her neck. Another report mentions lack of oxygen due to strangulation or suffocation. And suddenly, the explanation being given starts to feel incomplete. Not necessarily false, but not fully explained either. And that's the difference. Because when a story is clear, it doesn't leave room for this many questions. But here, every new detail seems to open another door instead of closing one. And that's exactly why people online are digging deeper. What makes this even more intense is how her family is reacting. They're not accepting the explanation at face value. They're asking questions. They're demanding answers. And when a family responds like that, it tells you something doesn't feel right to them either. Because if everything lined up clearly, there wouldn't be this level of confusion, frustration, and urgency. And this is where the situation shifts from being just a tragic incident to something that feels like it needs investigation. Not speculation, investigation. And now, with voices like Cardi B stepping in and saying publicly that she doesn't believe the official explanation, it adds even more pressure. Because now the spotlight is bigger, the questions are louder, and the demand for clarity is stronger than ever. Because at the end of the day, this isn't just about what happened, it's about whether the full truth is actually being told. Now this is where the story really starts to explode. Because once people online began digging into the details surrounding Joe McCann, the conversation shifted from confusion to full-blown suspicion. And again, nothing here is being presented as fact. But when enough questions stack up, people start paying attention. One of the biggest things that stood out immediately was the contrast between how Ashley Janae presented their relationship and how he did. On her side, everything looked public, polished, and almost like a luxury fairy tale. Trips, gifts, lifestyle, constant presence. But on his side, almost nothing. No real visibility of her, no shared moments, no clear indication that this was a relationship being shown to the world the same way. And while that alone doesn't prove anything, it created a strange imbalance that people couldn't ignore. Because in today's world, when one person is fully visible in a relationship and the other is almost invisible, people start asking why. Then came the behavior details, the small things that usually don't matter until they all start adding up. People began pointing out how quickly everything escalated, from dating to luxury travel to engagement, all within a relatively short period of time. And while that can happen naturally, in hindsight, it started to feel rushed to some observers. Then there's the reported argument right before everything happened, the separation into different rooms, and then the very next day, the outcome that no one expected. That sequence alone created a timeline that felt too tight, too sudden, and too unresolved. Because when major emotional events happen back to back like that, people naturally start wondering what really went down in those final hours. But here's where things get even more intense: the delay in communication. According to reports, there was a significant gap before her family was informed about what happened. And not only that, But when they were contacted, the information wasn't fully clear or immediate. That's the kind of detail that doesn't just raise questions, it amplifies them. Because in a real emergency, especially involving someone you supposedly love, the instinct is to act fast, to communicate, to involve family immediately. So when that doesn't happen, people don't just notice, they start analyzing every possible reason why. And then the internet did what it always does. It started building theories. Some believe there could have been something that happened during that argument that escalated further than anyone knows. Others think the separation into rooms doesn't necessarily mean complete separation, leaving open the possibility that someone could have gone back later. And then there are those who believe there could be missing pieces entirely, details that haven't been released, moments that haven't been explained, or actions that haven't been accounted for. Again, these are theories, not facts, but the reason they exist is because the official explanation hasn't fully closed the gaps. What's really driving this conversation, though, is not just suspicion, it's inconsistency. Because when every detail lines up cleanly, people move on. But when timelines feel off, behavior raises eyebrows, and explanations leave room for doubt. The story doesn't fade, it grows. And that's exactly what's happening here. The more people look, the more questions they have. And the more questions they have, the harder it becomes to accept a simple explanation.